Hey everyone, welcome back to Prime Comments. My gosh, it's been a while. I think about 2 months, maybe even longer. For those who haven't ever seen this series before, you're new to the channel, Prime Comments is a series where I go back at the past week or so of comments, pick out select ones that I wish to reply to, and then use this video to reply to them. Now, you'll often notice that when I choose comments, I'm choosing comments that disagree with my point of view, and a lot of that is because I'm trying to create a discussion, and there's no point in discussing points that I necessarily agree with, because if I agree with a point being made, what else am I going to say but I agree? Then move on. So generally, to get featured on a show like this, it would have to be something that I disagree with, or it would have to at least be a continuation of a concept I maybe didn't flesh out, or it could just be someone criticizing my channel, and I decide to kind of respond to that and see what happens. This doesn't mean that I only respond to hater comments. I try to mix it up and get a nice round of them, although like these last 4 pages are from someone who put a lot of research into something without understanding some things. That's whatever. Let's get right into the comments. So the first one comes from our video called "We Need to Tear Down the Casual/Core/Hardcore Gamer Barriers." And this comment was by Sweet Life of Dio Brando. And his response to this was that the way to tear down the barriers for games is giving difficulty options for games. Tales of Series and Shin Megami Tensei Apocalypse do this great. And I think that's a nice start. The thing is, I don't want to say that the difficulty settings solves everything, because what I was talking about in terms of the casual core and hardcore game barriers was, gamer barriers for starters, not game barriers. That's the thing. I think your thing's addressed as game barriers, not gamer barriers. The core, hardcore, casual thing is all about people just arguing at each other. If you go and you add an easy difficulty into Dark Souls, you're just going to have hardcore Dark Souls fans screaming at casual Dark Souls fans. That doesn't actually solve anything. My point was to stop arguing. Like, hardcore should not be complaining about casual. Casual shouldn't be complaining about hardcore. None of them should be complaining about core gamers. Like, all these complaints circle around the fact that we all play games for different reasons. Difficulty settings are nice, and I agree that there are a lot of games that should have difficulty settings that don't. And I might make a video on that in the future. But where I want to sit with this one is that difficulty settings aren't inherently going to solve this issue that I discussed in this video. And the video is linked down in the description below if you want to see what I was talking about. And I don't think every game needs difficulty settings. I want to make that very clear. I think games' difficulty should be curved to what the original vision was for that game. As an example, Dark Souls is typically considered hard because the people who made that game wanted it to be hard. They didn't want a casualized experience for that. And while I might enjoy a more casual experience for Dark Souls, that doesn't matter because that's not what they want this game to appeal to. They want this game to appeal to a specific type of gamer. And I think that that's okay. I think games like Super Mario Odyssey, as an example, I understand adding difficulty settings. I understand making smarter AI and less moons or whatever they need to do to make it harder. But there's also a consideration of what was the vision for this game. Mario games are generally not difficult games. They're just not. They've never really been. If we think back on Mario growing up, we had no problem beating Mario when we were 3, let alone when we're 5, 10, 15, 30 years old. Mario's always been a very easy platformer. And that's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you want difficulty in a platforming style game, there's a lot of indie titles to go to. Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. The Donkey Kong Country series is a more difficult, kind of platforming game for that stuff. And it can be frustrating for those that want Mario to advance and be that kind of thing. But now you're asking the developers and the directors to do something with the games they don't want to. So I feel like it's not always as simple as saying everything should have difficulty settings. I don't think that really solves much of anything, because we have to remember the vision of the game on the whole doesn't always fit with difficulty settings. Now, there are some games that definitely could use difficulty settings. There are some games that have difficulty settings that are good examples for the games that don't. But we have to remember it needs to be by a case-by-case basis. All right, moving on. The next comment comes from our "How Will the Rumored Xbox Scarlet Affect Nintendo Switch" video. And this one was by Jamistro1 Gaming. And he said this: "Why are you so concerned about Nintendo needing to upgrade? They are separate companies that produce separate kinds of games. Nintendo games are not that demanding, and they need that type of hardware. Stop caring so much about it being a generation behind or whatever. Why compare them when they are so separate? Just enjoy Nintendo and let them do what they want as a company. They have already proven they are successful even with flops. Just enjoy them and stop worrying. If you want something that consumes 4K graphics, get something else. And for starters, I have something that can do 4K graphics, true 4K, in my gaming PC. Not ideal. I prefer to stick a 1080 Ti in there versus a GTX 1070. But whatever. I can get 4K if I decide to sacrifice on certain graphical settings. And I use dual 4K monitors and do 4K editing. This video you're watching is in 4K. So I obviously highly enjoy 4K. And I never said anywhere in that video, in fact, I specifically, I believe, mentioned in the video, that I don't necessarily think the next generation of Switch needs to be 4K. It could support 4K Netflix or something, but it doesn't need to output 4K gaming. I said if they could have a next generation Switch that does 1080p 60 FPS versions of the 4K 60 FPS games running on, Scarlet, running on PlayStation 5, that would be ideal. Now, you might say, but why does it matter? Because of Nintendo games. Because I'm not talking about just Nintendo games. Now, there are Nintendo games that could benefit from this. Breath of the Wild, I'm just throwing that out there. You talk about how power doesn't matter. Breath of the Wild would inarguably be a superior experience with better hardware. It's just a fact, and that's not me dissing on Breath of the Wild. That's just saying that's an example of a game that is a little bit held back by the hardware. It runs at 900p. You can't even hit full HD with it. 60 FPS? Ha! You're dreaming for a game like Breath of the Wild to pull that off on Nintendo's current hardware. Now, that being said, the reality is, I'm saying this for third-party multi-platform support. It might not be something you care about, and that's okay. These third-party games are available on other platforms, but it might be a newsflash for you and for some other people. Not everybody owns multiple platforms. Some people can only afford to invest in a single platform, and if they chose Switch to invest into because of, Zelda and Mario and all the great Nintendo games, maybe Octopath Traveler, or heck, maybe they wanted a portable version of Doom and Wolfenstein, so they picked up a Switch for that. It would stand to reason that giving them more games that other platforms are getting that are multi-platform would be of benefit to the consumer. And to do that, you need a Switch that's powerful enough to get that support. Now, there's been speculation around how the next generation of Switch could be at base PlayStation 4 or slightly higher power, and that would be great. It's not going to hit PlayStation 4 power, but is that going to be enough, then, to get down ports of games on Scarlet and PlayStation 5? I don't know. Nobody knows. So that's kind of my brunt of the argument there, is that it's not that Nintendo needs to worry about their own games. It's that they need to worry about other people who want to make games on their platform. Nintendo has done for years this whole, we only worry about ourselves, we only worry about ourselves, we only worry about ourselves, while the rest of the industry is asking third parties, asking developers, asking all these companies, what do you want in our system? Now, Nintendo made steps of this with Switch. Part of the reason that Switch is successful is because Nintendo went to those companies for the first time, maybe ever, and asked them, what do you want? Here's what we're making. Here's a dev unit. What would you do? What would you make different? And that's how we ended up with twice the amount of RAM. Nintendo was only going to put in 2 gigs of RAM in the Switch for a 2017 product. But Capcom told them, you do that, our games aren't going to be, our games just aren't going to run on your platform if you do that. So what did Nintendo do? They doubled the RAM. So Nintendo is starting to listen, and this should mean in a next generation Switch, they're going to be listening even more to what these companies want, so Nintendo can entice more and more of them to support the platform. So yes, they don't need to have a streaming thing like Xbox Scarlet does. They don't need to push for the ultra 4K 60 FPS or 8K or whatever resolution and frame rates they're aiming for. But they do need to be cognizant of what the rest of the industry is doing so they can have a product that is truly what Nintendo calls it. Remember, Nintendo calls Switch a home console that happens to be able to be taken with you. And as much as we know it's based on mobile hardware and it's more of a tablet than it is necessarily a home console, traditionally, it's still one of those things that if you're going to stick to those claims, you need to offer specs within that portable factor that makes sense as a portable, but also makes sense to be able to run most home console quality games that are multi-platform. And I think they can get that. I think if they start hitting 8 to 12 gigs of RAM, if they start shooting for, a definitely newer mobile processing units, like inside the Tegra X1, it's using like AR-57s. They could be using those. I think they're also used in the Tegra X2. The next generation of whatever chipset is made by NVIDIA for Nintendo needs to be using the latest and greatest of those mobile processors, because believe it or not, mobile processors, they exist that are totally fast enough to run PlayStation 4, Xbox, and beyond games. But the Switch doesn't have that right now. So my argument is that when this stuff becomes affordable is when it makes sense for Nintendo to release a next generation Switch. And when that happens, it might be able to have a chance to get these ports. Anyways, let's move on to the next comment. This next comment comes from, does the Nintendo Switch eShop really have a curation problem? And this one comes from Gamer for Life WD. This should be a fun one. Are you effing kidding me? Oh my gosh, fanboy much? There is so much mobile and shovelware trash. The eShop is a mess that you are glossing over, but there's no forced positivity, right? So for starters, let me just talk about forced positivity for a moment. Forced positivity is essentially being positive about things that you don't actually believe in. There are some workplaces that believe in this, where always bring a positive attitude, never bring a negative one. So even if you're feeling like crap, fake it. And then there's that whole mentality of fake it till you make it. So fake the positivity until you're actually positive. And a lot of times, it's actually a wholly negative thing. It grates on you. It makes you feel like crap about what you're doing at work, because none of it's like real. Your emotions put into it aren't your true emotions. So I just want to say this about my content anyways. I can't speak for other people, is I don't force my positivity. If I am positive about something, it's because I truly believe it. You can think I'm an idiot for believing it, and that's fine. You can ignore all the examples I give and the arguments I make. That's fine, but it doesn't change how I feel. One thing I've always made sure to do on my channel, at least up to this point, is be true to myself and how I feel. I have been critical of Nintendo on many fronts. In that very video, I offer some criticisms of the eShop that I think could be done better. But I think it's overblown in how many people approach it. Now, you talk about how, there's tons of shovelware and mobile crap. I'm glad that you separated mobile from shovelware, because it also lets me know you just don't like mobile games that are on phones. Therefore, if it's on Switch, it's just crap to you. So at least you did signify that. But I hear this argument talked about a lot. There's tons of shovelware. Where's the examples? I'm actually being genuinely I actually gave examples in the video of shovelware on the eShop. But people that just say, it's just full of shovelware. Show me the examples. What are you talking about? Show me a screenshot of the eShop recently released list and circle all the games that you think are shovelware. Then let's talk about whether or not those qualify as shovelware. I think what happens is so many people, and I talked about this in that video, look at they look at shovelware as, I don't like this game, therefore it is shovelware. Like, as an example, people will talk about any game that is one of those puzzle games where you line up three items and it disappears. Zillion Candy Crush style games as an example, or heck, Pokemon Shuffle as an example. People will talk about all those games, how they don't belong on Switch, but there's a crowd that enjoys those kind of games. So what makes you think they don't belong on Switch? Now, I will say a rating system sounds nice on the surface. I think Nintendo ditched the rating system after what happened on the Wii U's eShop. I don't know if people remember. On the Wii U eShop, it was basically all Nintendo games were 5-star rated. You could not tell the quality difference based on user ratings between a Kirby Star Allies and a Breath of the Wild. You would not see a difference because the Kirby Star Allies reviews would all be 5 stars. The Breath of the Wild reviews would all be 5 stars. The user reviews didn't actually help anything. And then you would see with indie games, they would either have no reviews or they would have like a half-star review, and it's just one review. It's not an objective look at these things. I feel like the best way for Nintendo to approach reviews, and this isn't ideal, by the way, but it's to either use game rankings or Metacritic data and have that, talk to those companies and get that data automatically ported in to give a basis. The problem with user reviews, and this happens on Steam as well, is there are things like false reviews, both positive and negative, so you never really get a true outlook. As an example, if no one's, say 10,000 people buy an indie game, but none of them really review it, but then that review outlet paid some people behind the scenes, which is against the law, by the way, but they pay them behind the scenes to go and give positive reviews. Suddenly, that indie game that only 10,000 people played has a 5-star review and appears at the top of the charts. You see what I'm saying? And then there's also review tanking. Like, someone will be like, this developer said something super controversial on Twitter, so we should go review bomb their game. And it's like, but that's not telling you if the game is good. That's just getting personal, emotional feelings involved in a social media thing, in a social justice kind of way. So, again, user reviews are not perfect. Metacritic's not a perfect way to do it either because they weight their reviews. They don't treat every outlet equally that they allow in. I feel like they should treat every outlet they allow in as equal. They shouldn't weight IGN's review more than, say, when Jim Sterling used to do reviews. But that's just my 2 cents on that front. That's why I mentioned game rankings. They don't do that. They weight them equally, but again, they also let more people in that maybe shouldn't be allowed in. It's very difficult. I'm not saying there's no point in user ratings. It obviously works pretty well on Amazon in general, but the Amazon consumer base seems a lot more perceptive of being honest about products. Whereas, again, Wii U eShop, all Nintendo games are like 5-star ratings every time I look, and it's just, or 4.5 at worst, and it's like, what? How are you helping me decide if this is a good game or not? You're really not. And it was just a rating system. You couldn't leave feedback on the reviews. That's another thing that should probably happen. But again, some sort of review system should be in place. I'm just not sure user reviews are the right way. Anyways, let's move on to I want to thank all of you guys for tuning in to our first Prime Comments episode in a long time. And I want to apologize a bit for the more abrupt ending. Again, we released a Prime Comments Extra, our first ever extra episode of any of our shows. Like way or like around midnight or so this morning we released that because that segment alone was almost a half hour long, and it felt a little imbalanced between the half hour we spent on one comment versus the rest of the comments. So here you go. This is the ending of our actual Prime Comments episode. I hope you enjoy it, and good luck on possibly being featured on this upcoming week's episode of Prime Comments. As always, folks, I'm Nathaniel Rufflejans from Nintendo Prime, and if you like this video, you know what to do, and if you dislike the video, hit that dislike button. Subscribe for more content, and I'll catch you in the next one.